grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I have struggled in the past with drug and alcohol addiction. I've been free from those addictions for 7 years now, but I'm in the process, in this recovery process, I found I continue to struggle with all kinds of hurts, habits, and hang-ups, as you all must know. So I'd like you to start us off in prayer, and then I'll get right in it. Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity to share my story, and just for these great people here tonight that are willing to hear it and take it in. And Lord, I ask that you just give me the right words and you speak through me with clarity and confidence so I can at least reach out and help one or two people to understand what they're going through, and so that they can be pulled out of their darkness that they're going through my testimony, Lord. I just ask that I do this all in your glory and your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so I was adopted at birth, and I was born into a very loving Christian family. I had an older brother, 5 years older, that was my parents' biological child. We were involved in many church activities where my mom and dad were children's ministry leaders, choir instructors, and different plays and stuff like that they did in the church. We were involved in sports and went to Christian schools. I swam competitively from when I was 5 years old to my senior year of high school. We had what we would call the ideal upbringing and never really wanted for anything. When I was 15, I started to do poorly in school, and I was hanging around people that were into drugs and drinking regularly. My attitude started to change from a nice person into this ugly individual that treated my entire family horribly, especially my mom. I got involved in a relationship with a boy, and we dated for about 2 years before he enlisted in the Army. I got him, after he left for boot camp, when I was almost 17 years old and a junior in high school, I started to hang out with drug dealers and partiers and began to experiment in different kinds of drugs, mostly speed, and eventually starting selling it to other students. I did start to skip school frequently, since I was the treasurer on the school board, on the choir school board, and my mom worked as a dance teacher for the Pom Pom Girls, and she was also a choreographer for the choir group I was in. I had easy access to the absence slips. And by now, everyone knew that I missed a lot because of the activities I was involved in. And I well knew how to forge my mom's signature at this point. I had used so many of these slips that it had caught the attention of the principal, and I was called into his office. I was sitting in the waiting room and got scared, and I ran. I went home and I packed my stuff, and in an hour I was running away from home. This was about 6 months before I was going to graduate, and I dropped out of school and I got my GED. This particular group of friends that I was hanging out with took me to new levels of drugs and alcohol. We did everything from acid, meth, cocaine, shrooms, you name it, we did it. We went out and we broke into people's cars, houses, and even stole a motorhome at one point just to drive it out east and set it on fire. I was arrested for the first time during all of this, stealing something from a general dollar store on a dare. I lied about my age so my parents would not find out, which they didn't, but they prosecuted me as an adult. So that really didn't work too well. I had started probation and I became pregnant for the first time. My dad got a job transfer to California and wanted me to have a fresh start. Little did he know that I was pregnant and I was on probation at the time. I agreed to go. My mindset at this time in my life was not to worry about anything because I knew that somehow I would get rid of it or get out of it. This mindset would play a huge part in the fueling of my I don't care attitude towards everything and everybody. When I got to California, I decided to give the baby up for adoption. I went through the process of picking the family, then I told my mom and dad. Thinking that this was the first adult thing that I would do in my life, I assumed that they would be semi-happy. I was so selfish that I did not see how much this hurt them, and they were extremely disappointed in me. I ended up meeting a great guy when I got to California. He wanted me even though I was pregnant and loved me unconditionally. He was there for the birth of the child and consoled me through the aftermath of the adoption. We ended up getting engaged. He calmed those bad girl ways in me, and I had no need to do drugs at that time. He was, however, a recovering alcoholic, but I talked him into drinking with me one night. I really did not see this as a problem for him. He didn't get out of control, so me not knowing anything about a recovering alcoholic, I thought he was cured. Nothing could have been further from the truth. I started going to nursing school and I got my license, started working at a nursing home in Newport Beach, California, where I worked and I met a guy who I fell hard and fast for. He was 10 years older than I was at the time, and I loved that. In the meantime, my fiance and I had a church picked out for our wedding that we were to be married at. The dress was bought, and it was about 3 months away from us getting married when I left him for this other man and ran off to Vegas, and I married this other man that I was cheating with, all within a week's time. Later, I found out that this devastated him to the point that he had started drinking so heavily, he ended up losing everything to alcohol because I had hurt him so badly. I reached out to him a few years back, and he is recovering again and dating a wonderful woman he hopes to marry. So my first husband, Rudy, would end up teaching me how to be a functioning alcoholic and a drug user. He ended up being a very violent and abusive man. He would go off and hit me if I didn't clean under the toaster, and he was very unfaithful. Not being old enough to go into a bar, Rudy would go out at night and go to the bars for both of us while I drank at home. One particular time, this just sums up our kind of relationship. One particular time, he called me from a bar and asked me if I remembered this one girl that they had met, or that we had met. Then he proceeded to put her on the phone with me and tell me how much Rudy loved her new breast implants. When he would get home, I would get angry, we would yell, and he would hit me, and it happened about once a week, and that was the way we lived our lives. He was so physically abusive that I had many trips to the hospital, and my supervisors at work calling me into their office to say that the makeup was not covering the bruises. It was always the same excuse. We partied too hard last night, I tripped, I fell in the shower. I was very clumsy back then. One time he hit me so bad that I could not open my eye for a week, and when I did, the white of my eye was red for almost a month. This was the normal for us though. Rudy and I eventually moved up to Northern California, and his sister and his family lived there, so I thought this would be a great change for us. When we got there, we were happy for just a bit, but the abuse still continued, and once again, everyone knew from the black eyes to the bruises on my body. Then on a road trip to Calistoga, everything changed. We got pulled over by the police. Rudy had a DUI and no license, and ended up going to jail where he spent 30 days. In those 30 days, I had my friends pleading with me to get out, and this was my chance. So I ended up doing that. Now, more than 20 years later though, Rudy lives in California, and he recently has been calling me because he sees my Facebook posts about Celebrate Recovery on my page. He has admitted to needing help and for the alcohol and other emotional problems. I'm not only willing to help him when he calls, but I have forgiven him and genuinely do care about him. Something that I would never been able to say without God in my life. Colossians 3:13 says, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you have a grievance against someone, forgive them as the Lord forgave you. So after I left Rudy, I ran into the arms of the biggest meth dealer in town. Now Brandon was married with 2 kids, and we fell hard for each other. Needless to say, his wife just wanted to be there, so she accepted the fact that we were together. So much so that she let me move into their house, and I was a second mom to their kids. I had found my drug of choice though. I felt protected by Brandon and all of his brothers and drug dealing buddies. It was like a family. They would never have let anything happen to me or let anyone hurt me. And that proved it on many different occasions. And I felt protective in a sort of weird kind of way. That went on for about 2 years, and my parents were worried about me. My dad said I could come back home to Florida, but I had to do it my way. I would bring Brandon. After all, he needed a new start too, right? Well, my dad had made hotel arrangements all the way back to Florida, where we would stop and rest. Our first stop was West Covina, California. We got there about 1 a.m., and of course, we were high on meth. This was a nice hotel, and I'm sure they could tell we were trouble the moment they laid eyes on us. In the room, I had laid out all of our drugs and paraphernalia out on the table, and we decided to go down to the pool. The police were called on us, and they immediately handcuffed Brandon. Then they asked me to take them to the room where I had just laid out everything in plain view.
Ooh.
We both were arrested for possession of drugs with intent to sell and taken to LA County Jail where we spent a few weeks. At the end of those weeks, we were ROR'd, and Brandon's wife was there to take him back to Clear Lake. So instead of continuing on to Florida, I went back to Clear Lake to regather myself and to follow Brandon and my drug life. My intention was to stay and waste my life away doing meth and drinking myself into a stupor. But after a few months and some friends convincing me that there was more out there for me than the life that I was living, I decided to go to Florida, alone this time. When I got to Florida, my mom was, of course, less than thrilled to see me. She knew that I was going to change. She knew that I was not going to change overnight, and she was fed up with it. I lived with them for a while. Then with the help of my dad, I moved out. I got a small apartment and continued on being a functioning alcoholic and partying. I decided to continue to travel and live from town to town, drug to drug, all over the country. I would get involved in bad situations, get arrested, and then my dad would bail me out, and I would move again, leaving a trail of warrants and unpaid dues in my wake. I would get up and leave at a moment's notice, and I loved that freedom. My dad seemed to always be cleaning up my messes that I left behind me. My dad asked me for the third time to come back to Florida, to get back on my feet. Once again, he was rescuing me, and my mother was done with me at this point. I still continued to do the drugs and the alcohol and soon found myself pregnant again. I was dating 2 men at the time and was unsure of who the father was, so I opted for an abortion. I was so fogged over with drugs and alcohol at this point that I put this heinous act behind me. 3 weeks later, I was pregnant again, and I did the same thing. I had an abortion. I put this in my testimony to remind everyone that no matter how much we have sinned, we are forgiven. Even this kind of sin is forgivable. We need to remember that a sin is a sin. No matter what, we all have sinned. So we are all equal. He loves us equally no matter what we've done, and it is how we come out of that sinful life that matters most to God. About 2 months later, I was dating this one man and found myself pregnant again. This time I wanted this pregnancy. I wanted that white picket fence, the marriage, the family, and thought if I tried hard enough, even though I did not start the right way, I could make it work. I drank every day since I was about 16, and this would be the first time I stopped. But I did it for the next year, and I was completely clean. My son, Brennan, was born December 28, 2001. He was healthy, happy, and so was I. Although I knew that this was a loveless marriage, my son meant the world to me. I was blessed to be able to stay at home with him for the first 2.5 years of his life. My husband never stopped drinking and using, though, and I just couldn't do it anymore after I kept seeing him daily doing it. One day, I wanted a drink, and then he had meth, and that lifestyle started up again. I was taught at a young age to be functioning, so I was able to fool everyone around me, even at the Mommy and Me groups that my son and I attended. The lifestyle was too hard for our marriage, and he started to get a little violent, so I ended up leaving the marriage when my son was about 3. I stayed here in Sarasota, moving in and out of my parents' home with Brennan. My parents' home was probably the most stable place that my son has ever known, and I am grateful for that. But I was still drinking heavily every day. My mom tried to get me involved in church and other activities that involved church, but I resisted. I was brought up a believer, and I knew God was there, but I was so ashamed of what I had become that I felt too dirty to be a Christian. I did everything to prove that there was not a God, including practicing witchcraft. I hated my life so much that I wanted to blame God for all that. Luckily, my mom was a great second mom to my son, if not the only mom to him at times. And he was raised going to church with her and my dad every Sunday, and to a Christian preschool, elementary youth groups every week. And elementary youth groups every week. About this time, I had gone through a custody battle with my ex-husband, and I had shared custody with my son. I got pregnant again, and I was still using meth and drinking alcohol for the whole 9 months of that pregnancy. I gave that baby up for adoption. I pray for that baby daily because I don't know what state he is in, and that hurts really hard when I think about it. But I do pray for him, and I hope he's okay. My mom sadly passed away from cancer when Brennan was 8 years old, and I was 35 years old. It weighed heavy on me that she died knowing that I was a failure as a mom and as a human being. So I continued to drink myself into oblivion every day and every night. When I was 36 years old, I started to get red marks on my chest and was vomiting a lot. I went to the doctor's office and he said that I had the early stages of cirrhosis. I was like, yeah, right. I'm only 36 and I know people in the 80s sitting at the bar drinking their scotch all day long and they don't have cirrhosis. I thought that the doctor was just trying to scare me into stopping, so I continued to drink. When I hit 37 years of age, I started vomiting blood heavily, having hallucinogenic episodes where I was talking to people who weren't even there. My nose was bleeding uncontrollably and I couldn't even keep the liquor down. I must have been sick. One day I went to work and I could not function and was throwing up blood, so I called my dad and he took me to the hospital. I was diagnosed with stage 4 liver failure and was not expected to live past a week. My dad called their pastor and he and him prayed over me day and night. My dad and my son were watching me die right before their eyes. I made a video diary for my son because they had called hospice in and was going over how I was going to say goodbye to him. I thought about him and all the stuff I had done to him, watching me get drunk daily, watching guys go in and out of our house, being left alone at school to wait for me while I was getting that last drink at the bar, always going to Nani's and Poppy's at night because I needed a drinking night, all those sleepless nights that mom was high and stayed up all night long partying. I hadn't shown him anything as a mom. It was then that I decided that I was not going to die at that point. I wanted to make a promise to God. So I promised God right there, if I could live to see my son grow up and have kids of his own, that I would dedicate every moment of my life and every day glorifying him. Of course, we all know that we don't reason with God. But this is how amazing God is. I had never been taught how to pray to God for anything. I humbly thanked him for everything he had given me in my life, and I promised him that promise, not knowing this was the most powerful prayer of all. To tell him it wasn't about me and the outcome, but it was about him and his glory, was the most powerful prayer. The Holy Spirit guided me through that prayer that night, and it was heard. This girl who went out of the way to disprove God and hate him was given a second chance at life. But not just any life, a whole life with him at the center of it all. He has a plan in mind for all of us, and he has big plans in mind for me, but for his glory. Today I'm a high school camp counselor. It's in the summers at Lake Aurora Christian Camp. I am a ministry leader alongside my dad, which we have been told we are the only father-daughter co-leaders in Celebrate Recovery, where he can firsthand see the change in me, and I can see his recovery through the codependency and enabling he's did to me. We have been blessed to work this program together and help other families triumph over addiction and pain that they have endured. I'm a full-time student, a senior, 7 classes to go, at Liberty University, getting my degree in religion and Christian counseling, and plan to get my master's so I can be a licensed Christian counselor to help those afflicted by addiction, basically the teenagers affected by this as well, by showing them that there is a redemptive power in Jesus Christ. I am also a student leader at our youth group and work mostly with the high schoolers. I like to tell people that I don't have one child, I have 10. I have even gone back to swimming on the master swim team and competing in swim meets. I have been to Cuba on mission trips. I plan to do more of that around the world with Celebrate Recovery International so I can share my story. As my dad, the one person that should have given up on me, has now accepted me and gone above and beyond what any parent should do for their child. When all I did was cause him hurt and grief, he prayed, loved, and forgave. He is the best example of a Christian man I have ever seen. He is known to say that for a long time he didn't even like me as a person, but today he loves me. So thank you, Dad. It'd be better if he wasn't here. Sorry, Dad, but it would. And my son, Brennan. He suffers from anxiety and has serious bouts with suicide because of all he has witnessed and been through. But with God, all things are possible. We work through these afflictions day to day. He is a student leader for our youth group too, and he helps out with the AV sound for CR every week. He is now a senior in high school and has been accepted into 3 universities and has opted to go to a Christian university in the fall. I still have cirrhosis and will have to take medications and undergo procedures every couple of months. But I am here to tell you of his salvation and his grace. The good news is that I no longer have the uncertainty of what is going to happen after he takes me home. I am truly thankful and blessed every day for what he has given me. Whether it be a day or 20 years, I have been given the gift of redemption and no longer feel ashamed of who I am, because I know I am a child of God, and he is using me and my story to help others in their journey to sobriety through Christ. Our stories are not over when we get clean. In fact, that is where they have just begun. So please share your story with somebody, write your testimony down, because remember, it's not only your story, it's God's story you're telling too. Thank you.